What's up? Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad. What books are adults providing in libraries at schools? At one Catholic school in Melbourne, Australia, among other curious books, we have Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. It's not hiding away on a forgotten shelf either. It's front and centre on the highly recommended display put there by librarians. The blurb reads, Me and White Supremacy teaches readers how to dismantle the privilege within themselves so that they can stop, often unconsciously, inflicting damage on people of colour and in turn help other white people do better too. Sounds lovely. The book is a consequence of a 28-day Instagram challenge Layla posted called Me and White Supremacy. Layla encouraged white people to own up and share their racist behaviours, big and small. It became very popular, so she turned it into a book. A workbook, to be more specific. There is a version for younger people, but it's not this version in the school for the students. It was listed as a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list, and after sales dwindled, there was a boom right after the death of George Floyd, which sparked the massive rise of Black Lives Matter, after which the Black Lives Matter communist founders were able to buy multi-million-dollar mansions. Layla's book about white supremacy then surged to 5th spot on the New York Times bestseller list. Layla is British Muslim but lives in Qatar. She runs a podcast called Good Ancestor Book Club. Maybe her next book will be about the greatness of the Ottoman Empire or the wonderful treatment of women in Muslim countries. Or perhaps Africa, a revised history. It was always good until the white people came. Interestingly, Layla looks a lot like another character that left Australia because it was too racist. And she has this to say about her own book. Covering topics such as white privilege, white fragility, racist stereotypes, cultural appropriation and more, Layla Saad has developed a brilliant introduction and deep dive that is sure to become a standard in anti-racist education. You can sign up for her email letters and then read through things like this. The letter is titled, White Supremacy is Anti-Life. Why do they hate Asian people? Why do they hate black people? Why do they hate people of colour? Why do they hate Indigenous people? The thing that connects us is the hate that white supremacy and white terrorists direct towards our communities. So I have asked myself again and again, why do they hate us? White supremacy is anti-life. Throughout the centuries and around the world, it has decimated populations, enslaved generations, stolen lands, appropriated cultures, destroyed health and well-being, legislated hate, and attempted, and far too often succeeded, to grind BIPOC down to dust. So if you subscribe to Layla's letters and that letter didn't float your boat, you can listen to one of her podcasts, which only began after her book's success, where she talks only to persons of colour and you learn things such as decolonial healing, or white feminism betrays women of colour, or anti-bias, anti-racist education, or staying woke, or parenting through a critical race lens, or roadmap for revolutionaries, or how people survive in a world made for whiteness. Sounds jolly. And if that doesn't float your boat and you prefer more activism stuff and you work at a school, you can get all the staff to do the workbook, Me and White Supremacy, as started 225 weeks ago by some of her fans who are teachers. If you're an American teacher from K to 12, you can get the resource for free via Teaching Tolerance, whose programs emphasise social justice and anti-bias. A while before her book shot into race hustler stardom, it looks like Layla focused on being a strong woman, some mysticism and witch stuff. What inspired her to, years later, want young white kids to write about their white privilege and supremacy? Not sure. But there's a definite market for it in Western countries. So let's take a bit of a deep dive into this highly recommended book. We begin with the book overview. The book includes excerpts from the following books: White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, White Like Me, The Hate You Give. The foreword is written by Robin DiAngelo. Robin wrote a book called White Fragility. He's a self-described white anti-racist educator. He seems to believe every white person is inherently racist, and that if they don't, after reading this book, take action and get uncomfortable about undoing inherent racism, they are part of the white supremacy group. He says that expecting any easy answers from the author is especially arrogant of any reader if expected from a BIPOC. BIPOC is of course black, indigenous, and person of colour. Most white people are apparently apathetic to white supremacy, and this book is the answer of what to do to take action to undo one's inherent white supremacy. Robin sounds like a top bloke. The author, Layla, welcomes all readers to the 28-day journey this book will take you through to explore and unpack your relationship with white supremacy and how you participate in the oppressive system of white supremacy. I'll just quote Layla. I'm Layla, and for at least the next 28 days, I'm going to be guiding you on a journey to help you explore and unpack your relationship with white supremacy. This book is a one-of-a-kind personal anti-racism tool structured to help people with white privilege understand and take ownership of their participation in the oppressive system of white supremacy. It is designed to help them take responsibility for dismantling the way that this system manifests both within themselves and within their communities. It is my desire that this book will help you question, challenge and dismantle this system that has hurt and killed so many black, indigenous and people of colour. The book will help you hold a mirror to yourself, quote, so that you can deeply examine how you have been complicit in a system that has been purposefully designed to benefit you through unearned privileges at the expense of BIPOC. Layla warns the reader that discovering the depths of their internalized white supremacy will be overwhelming, but that it will create seismic change on the life of readers, but no one will come to thank you for doing that work. But if you want to be a good person, you will do the work. Layla then introduces herself. Despite growing up in Cardiff in the UK, Layla can only count on one hand where she actually experienced racism in her entire life. But she experienced subtle racism constantly, including, I quote, "Why could I never find a foundation shade that matched me exactly, while white friends always could?" Her dad wasn't around much, and this perhaps should be given a lot more psychological focus, but of course it isn't. She lives in Qatar, but unfortunately some of her family live in the white supremacist UK and in white-dominated societies, suffering the extended horrors of the enslavement of her ancestors. I mean, the woman has absolutely no understanding of the history of slavery at all. Not only did white people end most slavery around the world, her Muslim ancestors have a very rich history of enslaving not just African people, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of white people, including castrated males and underage women, for harems. She says she lived in Asia as well. I'm guessing it wasn't China. China evicted Africans during their 2020 COVID response, and propaganda told Chinese citizens to put not only white people in the trash, but black people. But her mission in life is to dismantle white supremacy, so let's crack on. Chapter 1, What is white supremacy? Layla attempts to define white supremacy. It's not just Nazis. It's in all of us. It's dominant. And it gives you unearned privileges, protections and power. Layla explains that the book will help me unpack my white supremacy on an individual level. Thanks, Layla. She again tries to use slavery as an example, chattel slavery in fact. What she doesn't know is that this was a type of slavery practiced around the world, including in some superior native Indian American tribes, extensive in the Ottoman Empire, and also in places such as New Zealand where Maoris, or technically Polynesians, enslaved Polynesians. Quote, "What you receive for your whiteness comes at a steep cost for those who are not white." She does not provide a shred of empirical data to back up her statements throughout the entire book. Chapter 2. Who is this work for? It's for everyone, including white people who are gender non-conforming. That's nice. It includes people who are darker shades of white, but they can do less work than plain old white people. Although the work you white supremacists need to do will make you feel shame, Layla assures readers that it's not about feeling shame or guilt. Okay, that's nice. Chapter 3, What you will need to do this work. To get the most out of this book, you need to be truthful with yourself. I quote, "If you go deep, you will tell the real, raw, ugly truths so you can get to the rotten core of your internalized white supremacy. What you get out of this work and put into the world will be beyond transformational. This way you will help persons of colour. You need love." Quote, "It means you do this work because you no longer want to intentionally or unintentionally harm BIPOC. You need commitment because the book makes you feel like, quote, you are waking up to a virus that has been living inside you all these years. And, quote, you will want to blame Layla, rage at her, discredit her, but she assures us that this is the normal response of the white fragility and anti-blackness lying inside of you. But staying the course will make you a good ally. Although, as we find out much later, allies are also pretty much white supremacists, according to Layla. Chapter 4, How to Use this book. She then tells us to grab a journal, go at your own pace, don't generalise and stick to your own inner racism. Go through the course more than once, and importantly, keep asking yourself, why are you internally a white supremacist? I wrote this, I don't know why I'm laughing. Chapter 5, Self-Care, Support and Sustainability. Take care of yourself. Oh, it is 2 a.m. Take care of yourself, but don't lean on BIPOC too much because it's also emotional labour for them. Feeling the feelings which are Feeling the feelings, which are an appropriate human response to racism and oppression, is an important part of the process to rehumanize yourself. All right, rehumanize is an important part to rehumanize yourself. You start subhuman. You start to realize that you weren't feeling these feelings before because you had shut down a part of your humanity in order to participate in white supremacy. White supremacy. Oh God, you can only say the white supremacy so many times. White supremacy purposefully numbs you to the pain that your racism causes. Thank you. Part 2. Okay, now we get into the 28-day challenge. Every day has a term for the reader to focus on. Layla provides a definition of the term, sometimes with anecdotes or quotes from other books. Then she gives examples of this term, and then why it's important you work on this term within yourself, and then you are supposed to make journal entries, and she gives you some prompts for each journal entry on every day. All right, it's titled The Work, Week 1, The Basics, Day 1. What is white privilege? We learn that white privilege is downriver of white supremacy. Science has proven that the concept of race is not a biological fact, but rather a social concept. A side note, every time black is written in the book, there is a capital B. And every time white is written, well, can you guess? It is a lowercase w. We learned that some of Layla's victim mentality comes from her mother, who started telling Layla at the young age of 7, quote, because you are black, because you are Muslim, and because you are a girl, you are going to have to work 3 times as hard as everyone else around you to get ahead. You have these 3 things working against you, end quote. Layla also shares that her teachers were racist because they didn't spend enough special individual attention on her, even though they gave her consistent top marks. Okay. Layla then takes us through the postmodern hierarchy of privileges from being gay to straight female to person of colour female and so forth. One is more oppressed than the next, or the other way around. She gives us some examples of white privilege, including number 15 out of 50 examples. You have white privilege if you did not have to educate your children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. You've nearly reached the end of day 1 and you're given some journal prompts. Here's one. Make a list of the different ways you hold white privilege in your personal life. Day 2. Well, you've woken up in your white privilege bed and you're going to figure out what is white fragility. White fragility, or melting down as an adult because you are accused of being a white supremacist, comes about due to lack of exposure to conversations about racism when you were a child. You don't understand history or modern day understanding of colonization, among other things, or how you take part in a system that oppresses black people. You avoid conversations about race as you don't want to feel shame. If you can't talk about the ways in which you are unintentionally complicit in racism, you have, you guessed it, white fragility, making you an, quote, unreliable ally to BIPOC, end quote. If someone accuses you of being a white supremacist and your retort is, quote, well, what about black supremacy, end quote, then you have white fragility. Don't forget to make a journal entry about how you have white fragility. Day 3, you and tone policing. This is when persons of colour have to check what they say and how they say it before they say it. Because for saying something the same way as a white person, they are treated unfairly due to racism. You white people are tone policing black people if you think or say a whole bunch of things. From the examples given, one includes, if you would just calm down, then maybe I would want to listen to you. If you ever say this, you are tone policing, and you are one descriptor or one of Layla's descriptors away from white supremacy. If a black person is talking angrily to you, especially about racism, and you won't listen to them, it's because you are tone policing them, and this is due to you thinking that you are superior because you are white. Now don't forget to journal down all the times in your life that you have tone policed a person of colour. Pop off to bed and count black sheep. Day 4, you and white silence. Basically, if you don't always speak up, you are complicit and have white fragility. An example given is staying silent by not attending protest marches against racism like Black Lives Matter or protests for immigrants at risk. Or, in schools, so if you're a student, I quote, students can perpetuate behaviours such as tone policing, white saviorism, white supremacy, white superiority, and colourblindness against students of colour, end quote. Being an introvert is not an excuse either, according to Layla. Day 5, white superiority. It stems from white supremacy, of course. Layla explains that even progressive spiritual white people, including yoga teachers, have white superiority because they have accused Layla's anti-racism work as being hate speech. There was a personal anecdote, or personal experience or something from Layla. If you read books by white authors, you have white superiority. But later in the book, we find out that if you read books by black authors for the sake of diversity, you are one step away from white supremacy. If you don't think African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, is the proper way to speak, then you have white superiority. Again, this is where Layla doesn't know much about history or how all the AAVE actually stems from Old England, including axe instead of ask, and even cracker, redneck, and chitlets. Also, the way of misusing grammar in saying we be, you be, they be, instead of he is, you are, and they are, also comes from England, or southern parts of England. As Thomas Sowell points out in his impressive book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Don't forget to analyse your white superiority in life before you go to bed. Day 6. Day 6, and you haven't shot yourself. Day 6, white exceptionalism. If you voted for Obama, or you have black friends, have had partners who are persons of colour, if your kids play with non-white kids, it is very likely you still have white exceptionalism and are only one rung down the ladder from white supremacists. This is real. If you have ever said, quote, but I don't think like that, or, quote, but I'm one of the good ones, end quote, in comparing yourself to something that Layla thinks is racist, then you have white exceptionalism. So make some journal entries. Day 7, review. Layla is not giving you a day off on day 7 because, I quote, on day 7, we do not take a day off because BIPOC do not get to take a day off from, in brackets, your white supremacy, end quote. So continue with your journal entries and reflect on all your racist attitudes you discovered over the week. Day 8, you and colourblindness. Layla says you can't teach your children to not see race or create a new generation of people who will not do anything racist or benefit from racism. Because that is not how white supremacy works. Colour blindness is the new racism, as it allows white people to absolve themselves of white supremacy. They are gaslighting BIPOCs. This is pure race hustling, as is the entire book. Layla references a bunch of other books that also rely on race hustling. Thomas Sowell would refer to Layla as a race hustler, or as someone who benefits from maintaining racism for their own benefit or existence, or profit. And their race hustling certainly doesn't benefit the very people they say they advocate for, and in fact does the opposite. Layla provides examples of colourblindness, one being, quote, affirmative action is racist. Okay, yeah. Days 9 to 11 focuses on anti-blackness. Day 9 is about anti-blackness for black women. Black women have it harder than black men and white women. Black women have it worse because they threaten white supremacy the most. Day 10 is about anti-blackness against black men. Black men have it hard for a number of reasons. One is that apparently they are seen as sexual conquests by white women. Poor guys. Or that white women only date or marry black guys to shock or surprise their own white family members. Also, white people call police on black people a lot in America, according to Layla. Again, she refuses evidence or just doesn't know it, this time in regards to crime statistics in America. Day 11 is about anti-blackness against black children. White people think black children are cute, but do not think they are cute children once they grow up. She wrote this, not me. Therefore, white people are racist towards black children. Apparently, white people think of black children as being more adult-like, and therefore they suffer in various ways because of this. The evidence and anecdotes given for this are lame, weak, non-existent. Layla provides examples of this anti-blackness towards children. Two are, if you want to birth or adopt black children, you have anti-blackness towards black children. What? Let me read that again. If you want to birth or adopt black children, you have anti-blackness towards black children. If you want to save black children from Africa or in your own community, you are anti-black. Don't forget to journal about how you have wanted to save black children. I've done an actual journal entry for you. When I toured Jacinta Price, who talked a lot about saving Aboriginal children in the Northern Territory, I was actually projecting my inner white supremacist. I will never talk about or do anything to bring awareness to the hidden suffering of so many Aboriginal children in Australia. Oh, I got a response from Layla. Quote, exceptional work. You are undoing your white privilege. Layla. She didn't really write that. Day 12. You and racist stereotypes. Here's a cracker. Quote, though a BIPOC can hold a prejudice against a white person, they could not be racist towards a white person. End quote. Oh, I need to do some white privilege meditation. The justification for this is because BIPOCs don't have any power within America, a country that only gives power to white people. Despite her entire book seeming to exist on stereotypes of white people, white racist people, she only looks into stereotypes of everyone who is something other than white. Day 13, you and cultural appropriation. Here we go. After you learn that cultural appropriation is hard to define, but definitely a result of white supremacy, it's defined as, quote, the adoption of exploitation of another culture by a more dominant culture, end quote. An interesting example of cultural appropriation is if you adopt a hairstyle typical of African heritage. I guess we just ignore African Americans who buy the real wigs that come from the enslaved heads of Uyghur Muslims in communist China. And of course, Layla mentions music. I quote, music, the appropriation of black music styles often filtered through a white lens. Okay, as someone who spent 20 odd years studying music at the highest levels and music history and learning the most difficult jazz and classical guitar pieces around, just to see if I could, this one is personal. Maybe it's more personal that she's calling me a white supremacist and all of my family. Anyway, I did my 10,000 plus hours plus many, many more on music study, so I know a thing or two. It was an interview and performance I once did on PBS in Melbourne that got me thinking about cultural appropriation. I played a Roland Dines arrangement of Felicidade Carioca, a Brazilian song that basically means happiness. But it was the BIPOC performer before me who spoke about cultural appropriation, and boy was he wrong. The understanding of where music styles in America came from is almost always wrong. Without going into specifics of music theory and leading notes and all that jazz, all the jazz theory came from Europe. If you analyse Bach pieces, you see all the jazz progressions in there, the 6-2-5-1s and their modulations into 6-2-5-1s or 2-5-1s in other keys and alterations and extensions and other musical things. You could, if you were a bit of a prick, claim that everyone was culturally appropriating Bach and European composers. But of course no one does, because music is a kind of universal and shared experience. The great jazz soloists and quartets and such emerged after the big band era in America, where most of the musicians went to fight in wars because remaining musicians adjusted to the times of the day by not having the scores of musicians for their big bands. So the focus of jazz moved to virtuosity and amazing solos that relied on exceptional knowledge of theory, of which many African Americans mastered, and we still revere them today as a result. The melting pot of migrants and music styles into America did bring interesting rhythmic patterns from Africa, music theory from Europe, and instruments largely from Europe. But jazz and rap and every music style stands on the shoulders of those who came before us. There is an argument for rap originating in America, but also a strong argument that mostly all it does now is bring self-deprecation for African Americans, which Thomas Sowell would agree is a cultural trait that also originated from England. How do I explain that? Meaning that people bring other people down for trying to get ahead, such as people who do well in school. But history gets in the way a bit, and you can trace rap back to Germany and the old and unusual style of Sprechsinger or spoken song. So it's fine for everyone to use the guitar, which originated in Italy, and that's not cultural appropriation, but using the didgeridoo is regarded as cultural appropriation. Anyway, back to learning how we can undo our innate white supremacy. After you've listened to culturally appropriated jazz, make a journal entry for day 13 with this prompt. How have I profited from, socially or financially, from cultural appropriation? I made a journal entry for this one too. Well, I spent a long time learning songs such as Roland Dines' rendition of Felicidade. I profited financially from performing this and many other world music pieces in small bars where I was paid enough to cover the cost of buying new guitar strings. I profited socially by never having groupies and by making small groups of racially diverse people taken through a range of emotions, then smile and applaud. Day 14, review. Just review everything and see how far you've come in 2 weeks. The next week of work is about being a good ally. Layla warns that you might be experiencing not apathy, but white apathy, because it's been a lot of work for you. So day 15, you guessed it, is about white apathy. Day 15, white apathy. Note how any race hustlers, such as Layla, just insert white in front of any noun. You can have apathy or you can have white apathy. While apathy means a lack of interest or concern, white apathy means self-preservation response to protect yourself from having to face your complicity in the oppression that is white supremacy. So, if you are concerned about a racial problem but are just too busy in life to do something, you are showing your white apathy. But if a BIPOC is leaned on to talk about a racial problem, this is a reflection of your white fragility or white silence. I forget which one. And because it is exhausting labour for them, so don't do it. Here's an example of where white apathy shows up. Quote, using your mental health and personal issues to opt out of doing the work, ignoring the fact that there are BIPOCs who also have mental health and personal issues who cannot opt out of being at the receiving end of your racism. Lovely. Day 16 is all about white centering. There are too many white people at the centre of attention, on TV, in movies, etc. This needs to change, including in countries, I suppose, where Indigenous people are white. I don't think that fits in. According to Layla, Australia Day is an example of white centering. Creating spaces for only people of colour and getting upset about this racial segregation is also an example of white fragility as a result of white centering, as a result of white supremacy. Let me say that one again. Creating spaces for only people of colour, also known as segregation, and getting upset about this racial segregation is also an example of white fragility as a result of white centering, as a result of white supremacy. Don't forget to reflect on how you have centered yourself as a person with white privilege in non-white spaces. Day 17. You and tokenism. Adding more persons of colour is tokenistic. Adding more books in libraries by black authors is tokenistic. Seriously. Basically, if you do or you don't, you are damned by Layla and all her ilk. While there is a strong argument that all of these race hustlers greatly damage lives of Aboriginal people or African Americans and such, this do or don't or be damned tokenistic argument that Layla is using was very much a result of the race hustlers. Day 18. You and white saviorism. White people who travel the world with intentions of making lives better for persons of colour are one Layla description away from being white supremacists. Colonialists, missionaries, they were all bad. Although Thomas Sowell points out that the places these people did go, these white people, are much better in various ways, and the places they didn't go or didn't colonise are still no better off in various ways. Or put another way, no one is travelling to certain parts of Africa where all the indigenous tribes are still killing each other on a regular basis, except our soldiers who are still suffering greatly from going. I guess the point of Layla's argument is that only black people can help black people. But there are strong points to be made about stepping in to help just makes things much, much worse. Look at Australian governments, for example, where they introduced welfare. This had very destructive effects on Aboriginal people, and the same applies in America, where welfare was introduced there. As welfare is in some ways a tokenistic replacement of the father, family units fell apart everywhere. Sowell shows empirical evidence of this being the reason why so many African American families fell apart in America. Welfare also took away agency. Then there have been a bunch of things in Australia that haven't made a jot of difference to Aboriginal lives. And the voice will just be another one of those things, but perhaps far more extreme and sinister in intention. I'll choose this journal entry prompt. In what ways have you tried to intervene or offer instruction or guidance believing that your superior white view would offer the best solutions? Dear Layla, after reading Me and White Privilege, I will never offer to help anyone again, knowing that my ideas or views are in fact less superior than the ideas or views of BIPOCs. Amazing work. Thanks, Layla. Day 19. You and optical allyship. I don't know. All I read is that as a white person, you can never really be an ally in Layla's eyes. But if you, quote, transfer the benefits of your white privilege to those who lack it, end quote, you are getting closer to being an ally. Day 20. You and being called out / called in. This seems to be like a version of white fragility or leaving a space or becoming defensive and a mix of other things previously mentioned. Day 21, 3 weeks in review. Three weeks have flown by. You are getting closer to now not being a white supremacist and make some journal entries about your progress. Day 22, you and white feminism. I feel like we've already mentioned this before, but feminism is mainstream according to Layla and it's very white. So white women are still closely tied to white supremacy according to Layla. The white feminist movement will throw BIPOCs under the bus according to Layla. The white feminist movement will throw BIPOCs under the bus just to gain parity with white men. Seems like an assumption and a half. For black women, they are standing at the crossroads of intersectionality, meaning they get hit from more angles than white women. Maybe Oprah, paid many times more than your average CEO salary, should talk more about this. Day 23, you and white leaders. White leaders need to do more to help BIPOC, but if they do, then they're racist. That's about it. Although according to Sol, Obama was one of the worst presidents in America's history. The worst. Day 24. You and your friends. The paragraphs are getting very short now. Layla is running out of non-racist white steam. Basically, just influence your friends not to be white supremacists. For your journal entries, you are asked to risk friendships or make efforts to invite friends around to do anti-racism work. Day 25, you and your family. A little bit angles here. Work on your family and often. Don't let them be white supremacists, don't excuse racism, and don't keep the peace. Sounds like a winner for the family unit. Day 26, you and your values. Make sure you look at your values so that you can do this work for the rest of your life. Day 27, you and losing privilege. In quotation marks, take responsibility for your own anti-racist education with the free and paid resources already publicly available instead of expecting BIPOC to do that work for you. End quote. Some suggestions. Layla's suggestions include donate money to causes, shop more at BIPOC businesses, show up at protests, risk your relationships, and I quote, take up less space and allow BIPOC to take up more space so that they can be heard and their leadership can be followed. End quote. Journal about how you will take up less space. Journal prompt. How will you need to lose privilege and safety in your friendships, workspaces, businesses, families, spiritual communities, and other white-centered spaces? End quote. Day 28. You and your commitments. Oh, I made it. I'm no longer racist. No, apparently I have to do this work for the rest of my life. But Layla comforts all of us white people who have finished her book, quote, so even when you slip up, forget, and regress into old white supremacist habits and behaviours, you can repledge your commitments and begin again. Phew! Layla then gives encouragement to keep doing this for life and provides tips such as seek out anti-racist educators and teachers and give them money. Layla then encourages people to use the workbook in groups and provides a detailed method of doing so for a number of pages. Well, there you have it. This book has gone into an unknown number of schools across the world, Western world, in Australia, and read by young people who are forming their views on the world and developing their identities. Who knows which teachers are using the 28-day cycle on their students or just parts of it, but it's not hard to imagine that many would see that as their duty, not so much as a duty of care to students, but as a duty of care to end white supremacy as Layla sees it. It's on the must-read, highly recommended display at a Catholic secondary school in Melbourne. Throw in all the other complexities of issues in Australia, what students are taught, or pick up from ABC or people in temporary positions of influence in their young lives. Throw in such English tasks such as this real example for a grade 10 English test in a Melbourne boys' school. Racism makes it extremely hard for individuals to feel like they belong in Australia. 45-minute test. Or another, being Asian in Australia is and always will be a struggle. And you get the situation of white people coming up to random young black people to apologise. A few years ago, I was out with some interesting folks after a book launch and we met a 20-year-old Sudanese man at a bar. He certainly had a lot of pep and he was very interested in just chatting. He told us how his peers, who were white, and people he didn't know at all, would come up to him and apologise for being white and for his suffering and the suffering of his ancestors. He began talking about Jordan Peterson and such, and as I had recently toured Peterson, we chatted about that. He confessed he thought that the apologies from the young white Australian peers were pathetic and very unnecessary. And in chatting with him, I was trying to get to the root of where he had developed some views. And it all came about because he watched one little thing that led to another thing, which is the same thing that happened to me. So if you see me and white supremacy on a Year 12 literature or psychology course, be rather concerned. But also be aware there is a whole generation of young people wanting to understand the world around them, and they are learning from people, whether you think it's good or not, such as Peterson, Amala, Zuby, and many others. Finally, the True Arrow Academy is nearly ready for a soft launch. Then lots of content needs to be added over the next year and then over the years ahead. Working hard on it, lots to do. Peace out, Sam. Battery's on 1%. I made it. Crikey.